What does it mean to break the things that don't work for you anymore, while also dreaming of the things that actually can? Well, that's what I'm figuring out now. So come along with me as I journey through this thing called life. My name is Dr. Nicole Truesdell, a 40-something-year-old ex-academic deconstructing from all the things that I was told I was supposed to be in order to figure out what it is and who it is I truly am. This is my abolitionist dreamscapes, so come along with me and strategically dream of the things that can actually make us human once again. Welcome back, y'all. Dr. Nicole Truesdell here. As always, I'm your host and guide for this podcast, Abolitionist Dreamscape. So welcome. All right, y'all. You here, we're here together once again. And this is episode 22, 2 to the 2, which equals 4. That's the number of foundations of home, of roots, and where we come from, right? And when I think about this idea of roots and homes and foundations, you got to come back to the locations that we are currently in, which is in these nation states. And right now in these nation states, we're seeing how raggedy these foundations truly are. And so this episode, I'm actually in conversation with somebody who has to work within these raggedy structures and systems, and somebody who I also greatly respect because she is heavily committed to bringing in equity into these spaces is Dr. Atiera Coleman. So I knew Atiera because I worked with her when I was at Beloit College. I hired her to lead the McNair Scholars Program when I moved up and created the Office of Academic Diversity and Inclusiveness, because I came to Beloit around 2013. I was a former student there from 99 to 03, McNair Scholar and an anthropology major, and then I came back to run the McNair Scholars Program after I finished my PhD program in anthropology at Michigan State. And in that process, the institution, the idea of what an institution truly is, really became revealed to me as the naivete of what that institution meant to me as a student, completely washed off as I had to now enact kind of equity in a space that claimed that it wanted to be equitable and that it was a leader in these kind of processes and these kind of programs, but in actuality had no real clue of how to enact them without reproducing the same deficit-based harm that perpetuates the inequities to begin with, right? And so that's why when I hired Atiera to come in to lead the McNair program, it was at a time in which we were also grappling as a nation with the raggedy structures of the nation state as we were coming into a Trump election and the aftermaths of that, which then opened up many white supremacist leanings. And we had things like Charlottesville. Right. Even before then, during the Obama administration, we were faced with Black Lives Matter as a movement coming into fruition once again because of the unmitigated and relenting police violence that was being enacted primarily against Black folks and Native folks. Okay, because at that time, there was also a strong Native American movement going on as well, a resurgence with Standing Rock and stuff, because you had the state coming down on the margins in a very direct, in a very aggressive way. So that was the climate that we were working in at Beloit at the time, while I was tasked with leading a new office, the Office of Academic Diversity and Inclusiveness, to usher the institution into enacting its praxis of putting the liberal arts into practice to make the institution an anti-racist space. Now, you might be thinking, what the fuck does that mean? Well, that's exactly what we were asking ourselves when I was finally able to assemble the full team. And that's when we decided to get creative. When I decided to get creative and say that if we are being tasked to fix an institution that doesn't want to be fixed, and I refuse to have all of us have the institution put their foot on our necks, then we're going to do this shit our way. And so that's what Atiera and I talk a little bit about in our conversation, along with this idea of what it means to be a DEI hire, because we are seeing the kind of resurgence of these attacks on DEI once again as the scapegoat for a nation not grappling with its past, with its history, and with the fact that we are all being forced to reflect upon the things that the U.S. has had to do to so-called maintain its peace and democracy. And has that really brought us peace and democracy, or is it further leading us into outright fascist authoritarian rule? Right. And I got a lot more thoughts about that. I'll do it another episode. But this really lays the groundwork for the conversation at hand, and how this conversation, even though we had it the day before the election results, really does really does set the stage for understanding why we have the results we did. Well, also, I'm going to say this, it's not over yet because these results also don't make a whole lot of sense, even though it's not surprising about the results. So there's a lot of nuance here, a lot of things that got to sit at the table at the same time that might seem contradictory. But when you put them all at the table, y'all, and you take the step back and you see what's going on, what are the different stories that could be told, then you can see how shit that may not make sense separately starts to make a lot more sense when you bring it together in different orders and different locations and perspectives. And this is the power of storytelling right now, right? Whose stories are leading, whose perspective inside is dictating the way in which we are seeing so-called reality. Right? Because reality is predicated upon how we understand stories and how we construct stories. And right now, the story that is being told is that it is everybody else's fault but the goddamn state, and the state resting all of its morals, its laws, its processes, its economies, its socio-political outlook on capitalism, on racial capitalism, on a violent racial capitalism that requires us to give up our bodies to it. And if we don't want to do that anymore, if we're realizing that we got to take this shit back, then part of taking that shit back is taking back our stories and imaginations so that we can understand how to reconstruct all of those different elements is on the table into a concept or into a way forward that will actually allow us to live. I'm going to stop ranting on that right now and turn it over to the interview. But I do want us to really grapple with this idea of stories, okay? Now, before I get that, I'm doing a couple of things in person now to help facilitate this kind of imagination generation through dream incubation. And so if you are in the Chicagoland area on December 8th, please come out to the Honeycomb Network. I'm going to put the link for the tickets below. I am hosting with Forrest Brooks and Stacey Renee Ehrenberg and band. And her band, a sound immersion incubator. It's called Dreaming with the Ancestors, an immersive sound incubator. What we're going to do is we're going to bring the crowd into the dreamscape by calling down the ancestors and working with the energy of spirit to be able to open ourselves up to the dreamscapes. And we need to do that communally. We need to come together in communal ways and allow ourselves to not only grieve, but to dream and to open up those spaces. So please join me there. And if you're not in the Chicagoland area, but you still want to go into these kind of dream incubations with others and allow yourself and give yourself permission to not only believe your reality, but embody that experience and take back your time so that you can take back the eminence of your humanity, then join me on my Patreon, Abolitionist Dreamscapes. At the Landscape tier and higher, I'm hosting monthly online dream incubators in which I open up with the contemplation. I make an original playlist that takes us on a ride into whatever theme that we are grappling with. And currently in the Patreon, we're reading Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. And so the themes for the dream incubators, as we're reading Adrienne for the next couple of months, is going to be on pleasure. So this month, the theme is the body. Last month was pleasure itself. And then next month, we'll get into most likely the theme of sensuality and sex. And what these themes do is it helps bring in that energy into the space that I invoke with the contemplation. We take a ride with the music for about an hour, and then we come back together and share and talk about what came up. And then that way, then in that speaking out the dreams, we can start to see where we align, where we don't, and how we can bring those dreams into reality. All right. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll have information on the show notes below. And if you want to do one-on-one work with me or have me work in a group setting, along with bringing the dream incubators to your organization or to your university space, then you can reach out to me at drnicoletruesdale.com under my Truesdale & Associates LLC. And that is my boutique strategy executive firm in which I create and work with individuals, organizations, and groups to give themselves permission to strategically dream by invoking the dreamscape. All right. So for that and more, check out my website, drnicoletruesdale.com. Now, let's talk about Dr. Coleman. So Dr. Atiera Coleman is the Chief Equity Officer for the state of Illinois, appointed by Governor JB Pritzker in July of 2023. A transformative leader, Dr. Coleman has made substantial contributions to advancing equity and inclusion. Her expertise spans assessment and evaluation, grant writing, research methodology, and teaching. She's an accomplished facilitator and presenter, having spoken nationally on equity and initiatives. Before joining the governor's administration, Dr. Coleman served as the equity manager for Rock County, Wisconsin, where she worked to ensure fair and unbiased access to county services. She also held the Associate Dean of Student Success, Equity, and Community at Beloit College, overseeing federally funded TRIO programs and leading the Anti-Racism Liaison team. Dr. Coleman earned her doctorate in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and remains deeply committed to fostering a more just and equitable society. And before I turn it over to the interview, and you'll hear that the interview, we kind of just jump on right in, I want to explain what TRIO is very quickly. TRIO is a federally funded program that has, I believe, 8 programs underneath it that work with populations that are underserved, and underrepresented in higher education. These are programs that came out of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, in which it was supposed to open up the ability for populations who were first generation, come from a low income background, have a documented disability, and or come from a minoritized background to have access to education. And so both of these programs, I was both a student support services student along with McNair Scholar, and Atiera was also a McNair Scholar. So not only do we run these programs, we are a product of these programs, okay? All right, now let's get to the interview. You know what, Atiera, I want to stop this. I don't like any of this. This is bland. This is boring. I don't know what the fuck is this course going. This is not going anywhere. Okay, let's rewind. Let's rewind.
I like the DEI being DEI hires conversation part. I don't think we need our whole background though.
That's what I'm saying. I think I'm giving too much background. So let's rewind. Okay, I can edit this whole first part out. So how do we start this? What's a better way to start this? Because there's too much background. There doesn't need to be that much background.
Maybe just our perceptions of DEI hire, because it's become a bad word, but it's not like we're against the work. We're against this like fake news kind of explanation of what the work is. And I think sometimes people confuse that.
They do confuse it because it's almost like there's an implication that they feel they have, right? Like
I think DEI has I've worked in jobs where I cannot say the word equity. And I will talk with people who say they're against equity, and I'm trying to find common ground. And so I talk about what my goals are outside of that language. And they're like, yes, I agree with all of that. So if we could steer that way. And I'm like, well, all of that's under the umbrella of equity. And they're like, well, I don't like the equity part, but what you were saying before. And so there is this way that I would say specifically the right has a really good job of coining things that people don't even do their research. They just start using these coins and think it's a bad word. And so DEI hire, what's funny is, as we were talking about, neither of our research is based in diversity, equity, or inclusion. None of my initial jobs had that in the title. But I think we've always been doing the work. And I think that's something that I was so enamored by with working with you, is that we didn't use diversity, equity, and inclusion language. We really didn't call out people for being racist all that much. We were like, we're here for liberation for all. You led it from this Black feminist lens, which already opened it up to being inclusive of really everyone and grounding it in just our personal assets and getting to know each other. And so while we're just trying to do our job, getting these students to thrive, getting them a PhD, doing what the institution hired us to do, I think for me, the biggest shocker was that the majority of the obstacles my students faced were from the institution, which me doing my job of eliminating obstacles to get my students to graduation and to a PhD program, by eliminating that automatically just became DEI, because it was this initiative that changed the status quo. And asked people to, well, if you stand for this, if you actually want these students to succeed, actually, here is what's preventing them. And it should have been that easy, but they didn't want to change it. And so that's when I realized, and it took me, I was in academia for a while before I think I could no longer take it, but a big reason and a big uncomfortability that's going to be in any space is the direct conflict between equity and the current business models that are out there. And it's hard to have those nuanced conversations with people who don't even understand the work at all. And when the new financial person for the institution was a Black woman, I think people thought we were at odds, and they were like, oh my gosh, these Black women don't like each other. And I was like, no. Like, I ain't gonna talk about, don't talk about like this Black woman. Her goals for her job are different than my goals for my job. And I can understand that I'm going to come into a meeting advocating for my students, which is going to require money. And her job has been to save money for the institution. Our goals are conflicting. We are not conflicting. And you're not going to put me in this position of pitting against another Black woman because you can't understand the nuance of that. I can disagree with her in the meeting and say that her work is not helping my goals. And that doesn't mean I don't dislike her. I dislike her as a person. She's a part of the same institution. This institution is perpetuating these things. And so I think that's the hard part. I once said I would never take a title with the word like diversity, equity, or inclusion in it. And now I'm the dang equity officer. I also said I'd never take a job with the word officer in it because I'm like, that is connotations I don't think. And yet here I am, but I'm also learning that my title could be, I'm here to give you a new car, lady. And people still wouldn't like me because of the work I do. So it's not the title. It's how I present. It's who I am and what I represent to them, which is change. And so it's interesting when you talked about the DEIA hire, like I thought about two things. One, I thought about the right is using it in this way to really just say anyone that doesn't look like them is a DEIA hire, which means that they're not qualified. Okay. Me as a DEIA practitioner, I think that also comes in because while no, my PhD was not in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I am trained in talking about the systems that contribute to inequality. I have a plethora of degrees and experience that affords me kind of like the knowledge to know my job. And yet I think a lot of people think I'm in this position just because of my identities. I will not steer away from identities. I am a proud, queer, Black woman. However, it takes a little bit more to be able to do organizational change. And like, that's my gripe. And I think some people don't understand that. They're like, yeah, you're upset. You should just be seen as a person. I'm like, no. They can call me a Black woman. That's dope. Me as a Black woman, just without anything, I do come with assets that other people don't. But also I have degrees and experience. And I know some things about how to do this thing. And so that's, I guess, kind of, I don't know if I would call it like this paradox, but just how I think about that is complex and nuanced. And I want to be the person to say, forget them. Like, I'm not going to like dwindle down this work by changing the words just so it's more palatable to you. And then also I'm in a place where I need to move things forward and I need change. And sometimes the only way I can disarm someone is if I don't use that language and I use other tactics because they're not even at a place to have a conversation.
It's not the same conversation because you're not having the same conversation, right? You're not having the same conversation at all.
At all. It's very different things. And so I think I've worked in a lot of spaces where I've been able to be radical, like under you, and then I've never been able to be that radical before. And so, but I think having that experience has allowed me, one, to be like, when people are complaining about the annual online 1-hour training that they have to do once a year, and they're like, oh my God, like this stuff is ridiculous and everything is changing. And I'm like,
We
yes,
had a whole semester. We had a whole semester long curriculum based. You got paid, sat in, had a follow up.
we dug deep. And so I'm like, y'all are acting like this is radical. And trust me, I know radical. And this ain't it. Like when we were doing the stuff at Beloit, like it was dope. And did we like getting the negative feedback? No. But I was kind of like, but I get it though. Like this is some radical stuff. Like we're doing the real work, and the real work makes people uncomfortable. It always will.
And you know what's funny? Like, because I didn't even think we were that radical. That's the funny part. I didn't even think, I just thought we were doing what made the most sense in order to do what the institution said it was doing, which was putting the liberal arts into practice. Like, that's what always cracked me up the most about everything we did at Beloit was and that was the biggest slogan back then in 2015. It was like, put liberal arts in practice. We put the liberal arts into practice. All that damn provost Ann used to talk about,
T-shirt.
right? But no one could explain it but us.
Mm-hmm.
No one could actually make it make sense. It was all theoretical, right? I remember when Anne would talk, and I'm like, woman, what the fuck are you talking about? What
She
are you
didn't.
talking? She didn't know. You, the damn provost, don't even know, right? So we put it into practice. It's like we're a praxis-based, location. Both of us are praxis-based scholars. This is why I loved Atiera, y'all, from the beginning. When I first interviewed her, I was like, no, she gets it. She's somebody who understands that it just has to make logical sense. And if it makes sense, then I'm going to do it. And for me, what made sense was the institution says it's committed to, anti-racism and, helping out the margins, but really it wants the money. Let's be real. Like you said earlier, there is a complete conflict in our goals, right? So, and if you listen to what Atiera is saying, it's strategy. Like this is why I love working with people who can sit in the nuance, because that is where you find strategy. This is why you also have to be able to dream, or at least be able to imagine, right? Construct the story as you're seeing it unfold, right? And that's what we did, because I'm like, y'all need this money because y'all broke. Like, let's be real. Y'all need this money because the overhead. So y'all, when y'all apply for these grants, right? Institutions want the grants because of the indirect cost. It's their overhead. They make money off of this. This is not some, taboo or not known thing. Like this is in the grants, right? You got to put in your indirect costs. And TRIO programs are one such grant that is indirect costs. So I wasn't stupid. Y'all need money. I need money. Shit. Okay, I'm from Chicago. We both need money. How can we make some money together? But as we're making money, I want to make sure that I have my needs met. And the needs being met is that we got to get these students in a space in which they not only are graduating, but are being successful and care about themselves enough to know that they did that, right? So that they can go ahead and do what they want to do. And so we weren't that radical, y'all, but goddamn. Goddamn, you thought we would have cussed their mamas out, spit on their graves, and tap danced. All we said was we developed a concept called an equity asset-based approach to working with students at the margins. And this is literally combining the concept of equity with a community asset-based theory, which is what my dissertation used a lot of, because I worked in Black, Asian, minority, ethnic organizations in the UK, third sector, got cussed out in all kinds of languages, but learned a hell of a lot about community assets, right? And community engagement and community organizing, for real, in the diaspora. So for me, it just made sense. Community, institutions, same difference, right? So all we did was just say our students have assets, they're not deficits. Just because they're low income or first generation or come from a minoritized background, or they're queer, or they have a disability, because we work with students with disabilities too, y'all, right? Just because they have those different identities put upon them does not mean they don't come with their own assets, their own knowing. And if our job is to put theory into practice, liberal arts into practice, then goddamn, our job is to help them marry what they're learning in the classroom with their experiences in life and make it make sense.
And they know about doing this. Like, this might be
They had a whole
unpopular
damn
opinion.
department called community. What was Carol's? What was Carol's department?
Oh, I don't know. You
Oh,
talking about with
girl,
the Duffy?
that Duffy program.
Right. But I feel like just as a whole, there's a level of mediocrity that people on the margins aren't allowed to have. But I feel like because there's this culture of mediocrity in places. They're very much aware of looking at someone and not focusing on their deficits, like how they might not, you know, be a good candidate. They might not have the necessary skills or credentials. They know how to do that. And look at the positive of like, but you know what they do have? Spunk. And if that's what they want, then great. That's fantastic. That just tells me you have the capability of shifting your lens. And all we were saying was, hey, when you meet someone that might have an identity different than you, whatever strange stereotypes that come to your mind, just kind of like put that in the back seat, and whatever, deficits you think come along with that, and maybe just get to know them and ask them how they got to where they are right now, and then utilize those skills and assets to propel them. Again, it just seems so logical. Like the math is mathing.
But then we got cussed out, y'all. Then we got cussed out. Then we got cussed out, right?
Like
and
I was like,
Atiera in particular.
And they were like, well, what about this exponent? And we're like, we're not talking about any of that. Like it's just it's simple math. And they were like, you sit there on your high horse and speak down to us and call us racist. And I was like, I guarantee you, racist, the word race wasn't even in the presentation once.
Now, y'all, I don't think so. We got my office. We had newly formed. I think it was 2016. No, 2015. Excuse me. It was 2015. It was before Trump's election. And we were asked to come in and help train the faculty who are working with first-year students, because the school has this first-year student program. And it's notorious for being a space, depending upon who you had as a faculty member, of how your first year experience went. And for our students who work with TRIO programs, that was vital. We had a lot of students who, when we say low income, y'all, we mean low income. This is federal guideline low income. We had a lot of students who were dead ass low income, first generation. Some of them are first generation, even high school sometimes, right? Well, this is a whole new experience in the middle of Beloit's in Wisconsin. Okay, Wisconsin. So this is it's on the border of Illinois, y'all, but it's a little different world, right? So your first year experience does matter. So we were asked, okay, I didn't volunteer. We were asked to come in and lead a session on our equity asset-based approach to working with students, because it was successful internally with our students, so that it would help faculty be able to retain students, because they had a retention problem. Side note, when you're looking at schools, y'all, look at the retention, because retention is going to tell you if they're able to enact all the so-called promises they have, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what the kind of strategy or what the branding is. Retention rates tell you everything, okay? Side note. So they needed to retain. Guess who was retaining their students? We were.
Trio. Us. Nicole.
Over and over and over again. Y'all, so another side note, they ran them numbers so many times to try to discredit the numbers, that every time they ran the numbers differently, we looked better. That's how well we did our job, okay? So back up. So then we get asked to go ahead and do this session. So I lead, right? And I had a feeling in my stomach. I did not tell y'all, I said, y'all, just be willing. It may be hostile. Atiera said, no, it won't be that bad.
I was so naive. I was all wide-eyed. I was like, this is great. I mean, presentation.
We had race nowhere, y'all, nowhere.
And we had already come to the conclusion that harm has already been done on the students. So we weren't there to be like, you're causing harm. We were there to be like, hey, harm has been done in various ways because these approaches haven't been used. So since they've been done, if a student comes to you now that the harm has already been done to them, probably by someone else, how can we work with them? What approaches can we help move them forward? If they weren't, advised with an asset-based approach before, how can you step in and enact this approach to make it better? That's really all it was.
Because we grounded it in the idea of equity, y'all, which meant we were saying because the structures themselves lend them to be able to only see one another through this deficit-based lens. We weren't even blaming them. We were saying, y'all, you are a product of your environment. Basically,
That's
right? And if you
right.
follow my work now, you literally are hearing what I talk about now. Like you are conditioned by the location of who created you and your identities, right? We were just trying to say, listen, we can help. So I set it up. And then the as student support services went next. He was underneath us. So this was Marijuana Sawyer.
Dr. Marijuana Soy.
Dr. Marijuana Sawyer. Put some respect on her name as well. Okay, good. I'm proud of her too. She finished that shit. During while
Mhm.
she worked. But Dr. Marijuana Sawyer came up and she opened the space up with like literally like an exercise to get people to open up. So we were even trying to give examples of how you can incorporate exercises into the lesson. Then Atiera comes. I can already feel in the room a little tension, right? Because we were saying that, these were students we work with. Now, marijuana ended up saying our students. This became a trigger for some of the women in the room. And I'm saying women in particular because faculty members. Then Atiera comes to the stage. And Atiera's role in the presentation was to give actual case studies, real ones that were verified, written by students, so that we can give examples, essentially vignettes, right? Because
Yeah.
again, both Atira and I are trained in
Right.
ethnographic and qualitative analysis. So you tend to give vignettes or some type of data
Mhm.
as an
Mhm.
example of then what the solution could possibly be or recommendations, right? You follow me, y'all? You following?
Right. And tying in adult learning, which we can talk all day long about an approach, but when you get confronted with it, sometimes you don't know what to say or how to handle that particular thing. So we're just trying to provide real life situations. And if you encountered it, we're giving you some tools, a takeaway, if you will,
Because we're all trained in fucking pedagogy too. We all have been trained in how to teach different populations, right?
So we thought. But I went up there, simple, easy. Like it was very simple. There was a little vignette on the screen. It talked about a young Black woman who went in for the first time to see her advisor. She was probably all bright-eyed and excited. And this particular advisor said something of the sort of like, people from your background generally don't do well in the STEM fields. And so I feel as if we should think about other majors for you. Just something like that.
Side note, y'all. Now, side note to this. At the same time, Atira is giving this example. We literally have a grant that I am co-leading on with Steve
Oh,
Wiscamp because it was shown that we had a deficiency in getting students of color to go past first year science classes because of these barriers. So the institution wrote a whole ass grant about this as well. Just side note. Go ahead, Atira.
so they know the issues. They've seen the data.
And
So
got the
we're
money.
just providing this. You would have thought that I stood up there and pointed out at somebody and was like, "Hey, you, Doug, guess what I heard you did? You told Sarah that blah, 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 blah." That's how people reacted to me. So I was expecting this to be like, "Hey, this could have happened to a student. If a student came to you and said this happened to you, how might we respond with an asset-based approach?" And I was just expecting when the hands went up for them to give some sort, "Oh, well, I would try to assure them that regardless of what that other advisor said, that the STEM field is a very good option for them and blah, 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 blah." No, that's not what happened. The first question was like, "Well, I don't think we can answer this because something like this would never happen at Beloit." So I reiterated, I was like, "Oh, while the details have been left out of the vignette, all of these are actual scenarios that have occurred on this campus. All right, so what are some approaches we could take to this example?" Next hand. "No, I don't think that this is true." And I'm like, "Oh no, it is. It's true." And then someone was like, "Well, this may have happened, something like this may have happened to you while you were here, but a lot has changed since then." And so at this point, I'm like, I know I put on the slide that this was a real case Beloit student. So I turned because I'm like, maybe the projector turned off and they're just looking at an empty wall because it's not that complicated. We've established that this happened. Let's move on. And we could never move on. We were never able to come back because they weren't able to just accept that sometimes messed up things happen. Was that a great thing that happened? No. But we weren't trying to shame or blame you. We were trying to say, hey, sometimes these things happen. How can you correct it? And what I find interesting, though, is that if I went to a meeting and someone shared a vignette of something that happened in my organization, unless I did that thing, I'm not going to be really defensive about it. Like, my goodness.
Unless I did that thing. Unless I did or I witnessed that thing. And so y'all have to understand, like, Atiera's being nice. They attacked her. Them faculty attacked her to the point where I had to stop. I had to stand up and I say, this is done. These are real case scenarios. You will not talk to my staff like this. And we were invited to do this. And if y'all do not want to even engage in a conversation, instead, y'all want to sit here and attack the people who are a part of helping this, and also somebody who's an alum, then we're not doing this. And I shut that shit down. Right? I shut that shit down because you would not attack people who are doing their fucking jobs. Not on my watch, right? And then afterwards, this is what killed me afterwards. So then afterwards, we were all going to lunch with the first year students, y'all. This was the meeting before they were actually meeting the first year students at lunch. So we all go to lunch, and I have these faculty members coming up to me individually, apologizing and saying that, they were really excited for the things and they were really upset. And I looked at them all and I said, you're a bunch of fucking cowards. None of you said anything in that session. You let us burn. And of all of us that burned, we are literally, 2 of us are alums who have gotten their fucking PhDs, who are Black women. Somebody I know is gay, y'all. Everyone else did, but technically 2 Black queer women, but untechnically not. But anyway, so you know what I'm saying? Like, and there was a way that was a wake up call for me where I understood this is where maybe it quote unquote radicalized me, but I didn't feel it was radical, even though it did become a radical thing. After that is when I realized we will no longer take the burden of having our office be the ones to do all the training. We were going to train these motherfuckers to figure out how to do their goddamn jobs well. And I actually started that in McNair because mentors. So McNair is a program where it does research. And so we had these mentors. And Lord, let's hear it for you got there. The mentors were a hot ass mess. Y'all, so students have to do 2 summers of research, and so the mentors also get paid. Now, side note, faculty for a long time did not get paid well. I will admit that. Neither did staff. So this idea that if you work in higher ed and you ballin', baby, no, you not. Unless you are literally tenured in these high, either Research One or Ivy Leagues, y'all really ain't getting paid. People really ain't getting paid. So that tuition is not going to where you think it is. It is going to administrators. And as a former administrator, I will say that shit now. There's a lot of top heavy. That's a whole other conversation. So anyway, so you had a lot of faculty who would supplement their paycheck. I'm not mad about that. But what you're not going to do is supplement your money on the backs of my program and these students who actually need the training because they're trying to do something with it. I also got goals to meet. Like, we can't keep getting this money that you want if we don't meet these goals. So when I first came in, I decided that the mentoring was so deficit-based because, and what Atiera said earlier, you were spot on when you were saying how the change maker, but it's also the mediocrity. Because a lot of these students, now I say these students were bright. Well, we had an average GPA of maybe 3.75. Average.
Brilliant students. Brilliant.
But honestly, a lot of them were dirt fucking poor. Some of them had been formerly undocumented who had then gotten their documentation. So they were literally first gen all kinds of ways, right? You had a lot of kids who were homeless, right? We always had at least one student who had lost parents either before or during. So they were literally homeless, who were maintaining 3.7s and above in all the disciplines, right? These were brilliant and fun kids, right? And I say kids on purpose because they were still kids. Like the young adults, they're kids, right? So that's all of that, their humanity together. But because they were that demographic, and a lot of these faculty did not have the hopes and dreams that they thought they were going to have by themselves being teaching at an R1 or an Ivy, or because they didn't get the full rides, they would tell our students who were brilliant to not expect full rides to grad school, to not expect to be able to get X, Y, and Z, even though we had the data to show that our students were always fully funded going to school. Don't play with me and my programs. Don't play with us and how we do our jobs, right?
We had the receipts. Girl, I had to create a whole PowerPoint, and half of it
No.
was just charts. Just like 90% go with full
Full
funding.
funding, including master's programs, including masters. I helped a student who I love him now, but he got on my goddamn nerves then. Love you to death, but I'm not saying his name. But he did not do well. He still had full funding for a master's program, got his PhD, and now he's a doctor. Come on now, right? But because it was the demographic of these students and the faculty were majority white, men and women, right? They couldn't imagine because they're the training, right? This is the equity piece, y'all. This is why equity actually matters. Because it's the structures we don't understand that need us to literally digest them, make them subconscious and then spit them back out, but then telling ourselves we're doing good. So in these institutions that are based upon deficits to begin with, in spaces that we were never imagined to be in, how the fuck can you see us as these brilliant, intelligent beings when you literally have been trained to teach us as if we are deficit-based entities? So then I said, you ain't doing my students like that. So every mentor had to go through a mentoring program. Like they had to go to class with me. And then Atiera picked that up and continued it on.
And that's the work. And I want to, clarify, because you said after that session, that's when you became radicalized. No, I think that's when you understood. I think we thought the bar was at one place with where the institution was on their journey of equity. And that session, we were like, oh no, the bar is like below the ground. And so we had to start doing the work. And do I think that the work in general was radical? No, but in organizations, that level of work of lens shifting
Yeah.
is radical, because so often, like especially like in government, I have to be so careful with how I work with people because I legally cannot tell people what they can value. And I mean, I personally don't want to have to tell you what to value, but I can tell you how you have to conduct yourself as an employee of the state on work time. I don't like to teach tips and tricks, but when you shift it from that value to just, well, what is the law and what am I going to get written up for? It becomes that. And so I have to build trust with any new place that I go into, because I need them to have some sort of motivation to want to learn this. Because when they have the motivation, then they're not going to come to my superior talking about, she trying to have me change my values. Like, they'll get the work, but until you get the work, it does. This, I think, one, just in general, our society does not do a great job of knowing how to navigate our emotions, just in general. just in general, there's not a lot of variety there for a lot of people. And so when they're feeling something in their body, and we are feeling people, okay, we're not thinking people, we are feeling people first. Our stuff is in our body. And so when they're feeling something and it might not feel comfortable, some people legitimately don't have a wide range of emotions to attach that feeling to. And so it instantly goes to anger. And that's a bigger problem than just trying to show somebody how they can create equitable approaches to create a psychologically safe environment for their employees. Like, that's going into the weeds of like psychology that you wouldn't think this work goes into, but we have to, because I have to realize that me bringing up race brings up emotions in this individual that they maybe have never considered before, they've never processed them.
Thank
and
you.
all of that anger is then going to be put on me.
Yep.
And all of that anger is going to be put on the work.
Yep.
And once that anger is there, now they're just having an emotional response. And I can't have a conversation with an emotional response.
Especially because when you're not exactly what Tara, yes. And this is something that we really got at Beloit because of how sick all of us got, because of taking on that stuff and realizing, no, that's the protection has to be to bounce it back off, right? Because we are not taught to be in our emotions, because emotions are both feminized, therefore demonized as a way to disconnect you from the body. So you're having this emotional reaction, right? That's why I always say, if you are a DEI practitioner, you are managing people's emotions. That is your first job. Your first job is you are managing the emotional response to the fact that you brought up a word that they themselves have either never grappled with or been told that that is not their problem to deal with. right? But the thing is, and I always say this, I can work with your anger and rage, but baby, don't put that shit on me. Be mad at this, be mad at the right goddamn entity. Baby, I
Thank
will work with your rage. I got a whole program, Rage to Heal. Use that shit to burn it up, but don't burn me up. Don't burn you up. Burn up what needs to be burned up. Your attachments to the idea that you yourself somehow got here on your own merit, but you're realizing because whatever identity was put upon your body allowed you to have the perception that you were an individual, therefore you had merit, then you got shown somebody else who you were told your whole life was beneath you in some way, shape, or form, comes in and easily does what you could not truly do, but you have been learning how to skirt around. It shows your mediocrity. And that's the imposter syndrome, y'all. I really pushed back on a lot of I told y'all this, right? I remember telling y'all at the staff, like, we cannot take on the imposter syndrome because the imposter syndrome is the fucking institution. It is those who have aligned with that because then you get shown exactly what you say you are doing. So we got it lambasted because they said they were doing liberal arts in practice. We just did it.
Right.
And we did it well.
I'm
Y'all,
not
so well that when Atiera created our what was that, the annual report, so I decided to do an annual report, and Atiera literally helped with the statistics of it. Oh my God, helped really understand how to make the assessment of stuff. Y'all, that year was the only positive thing that they could put in the board book to the board of trustees. And I'm not even joking. I'm a Leo. I can make a big, I am not joking. It was the only positive thing was our annual report from the Office of Academic Diversity and Inclusiveness with the cover picture of the first Black woman to graduate from Beloit in 1896, I believe, Grace Ousley.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was what they had to use in order to not have the board literally cuss them all out because the institution was not doing well at that time.
And I think Nicole's being kind again because it wasn't just that. I feel like for years, even after she left the institution, they were highlighting her work, her frameworks. Maybe they changed the name because they like to change the name to a different acronym. But it was that work. And coming back to your thing about like imposter syndrome, like I think what's hard about that, like I think some of these terms they get thrown out in spaces, but they have kind of like this whiteness lens to it. And it's like when you think about that from like a psychology perspective, because I've been to therapists who clearly have never had a client of color before. And when they use words like that, like imposter syndrome, like it's just that, and like it's all in your head, I'm like, you're completely eliminating the fact that yes, I do deal with anxiety. I mean, sometimes it is. I'm not going to just say that I am just mentally 100% there, but many times when I walk into a room, someone will look at me and discredit my work and credentials. There are many times I can be giving a presentation and what I said was crystal clear, but because of whatever cognitive dissonance they're experiencing, they just can't see it. And so they continue to ask questions like I'm the one that's confused. And that's not imposter syndrome. That's not me being confident. That's not me being well prepared. That is just my embodiment and how I'm viewed. And so I'm not saying that imposter syndrome doesn't exist, but I feel like for populations on the margins, some of that is true. And I think it would be much more useful. Now I'm working with someone who sees that, who has that lens. And so they're like, it ain't right, but let's talk about tools for you to still be able to survive and thrive in this environment, because that ain't going to change tomorrow. Like that's going to continue to happen to you because of who you are. And I say this all the time as well, is that when you work in DEI space, regardless if it's in your title or not, that's one of the few jobs that the better you do your job, the more people will dislike you.
Yes.
And that's hard emotionally and it's hard mentally to like cope with that. And that's what I work with practitioners from like around the state on, because when they really start making great changes, then all of a sudden they're a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden they start getting called in for check-ins and they're concerned about the direction of the work and all of these things come up. And I have to consistently remind them that if your work was just performative, you would never hear from them. The fact that they even noticed means that there was an organizational change that impacted them. And while it made them uncomfortable, it could have retained a whole host of other people. So don't put that on yourself. I'm not saying continue to take abuse if you don't want to be in this space, but don't think that that has to do with your work. That has more to do with them and them not understanding what the work actually is.
Yes. Or actually, really, I would say they do understand what the work is, and then they got done. Right? There's another way to think about it. I'm being serious because, like, this honestly is. Let's talk about this, Atiera. I'm glad you brought this up because this is something that I do a lot of work with now with people. This is why I say the strategic dreaming is so important, because once you have to believe your reality, but believing your reality will crack a lot of assumptions and a lot of illusions that many of us, especially as Black women, especially as Black queer folks, have had to put on in order to make it through these institutions to begin with, right? So this is why I talk a lot. Me and Moya talked last episode about this idea of identity cracking. And I think what is cracking for a lot of us, and I'm going to say this in particular as Black women, right? Black women who work in these so-called professional DEI spaces, is that you have to break, and listen to me, y'all, you have to break your attachments to the construction of Black womanhood in order for you to realize that when you walk into these spaces, you will always be seen as the problem the minute you actually do your job. Because you are walking into a plantation. The plantation only understands the Black woman's body as a source of reproduction and labor. That is the only thing it knows. It only knows how to extract. Once you believe that, it will break your heart, but it will also break your ability to only see yourself as of service to these spaces, as the fixer of these spaces, as you have to just do it harder and better and just show. Because the harder and better you show, what you are showing is what Atiera said earlier, the mediocrity of the space. And who wants to be shown their mediocrity, y'all? Let's be real.
Especially people who already don't have emotional variability.
Listen, say it.
Like, we're dealing with multiple issues.
Shit. And this is literally what Carol Anderson was talking about with white rage. This is why I really appreciate the construction of white rage, and white fragility needs to heavily be dismantled as a framing for especially white women, because it is making y'all too comfortable. Y'all are some angry ass people that needs to sit in that rage to understand that you are both beholden to the white patriarch while also being the ones who are raising that white patriarch. Right? We all have a role we play within the construction of this nation state that is built upon a plantation system, right? That is, to me, what DEI exposes when it is done, right? Because I guess we were radical because we were getting foundational. We couldn't do the work we did until we got to foundations, right? I felt like we never got to the good shit.
Right. And a lot of organizations don't want that, though. They just want the performative on the surface stuff. They want it in this transactional way.
And they want it in the shiny way, right? The innovation, the shiny, the new, because that's capitalism. Don't fix your foundation, build on top and let that motherfucker crack.
Absolutely. But that's hard. And it doesn't make people feel good sometimes. And I also think that it's really hard for people to reconcile that two things can exist at once.
Multiple, right? Multiple.
I think it's because of our identities that we've had to live through that so often that's just like, we're like, duh. But I think for some, it's really, really difficult. So you're kind of speaking about the fragility of white women. And I do think for some, it's very hard for them to, one, hold their oppression as women in the society, but also see that they have privilege. And to me, I'm like, it's not even that hard. Look, I'm a queer Black woman. I'm not saying that I have the least amount of privileges, but I'm on a chart, I'm down there. But I still have privileges over some in our society. And I can recognize that my education, my class, my ability to know people who have a podcast, like, these things are privileges in the way that I navigate through life that I can acknowledge. And then also see ways in which I'm oppressed. Like, those two things don't have to like not exist together. And so that's really what, at the end of the day, if I have a conversation with someone at my job and they understand that, like, even that just mind shift of like, just because we said you had privilege doesn't mean that you haven't been hurt. Like, and I feel like that's like some of them need like their little hug, but I'm not trying to be like their mammy. I'm not trying to do that for them.
That's the
I'm
thing
trying to
too.
like
Yeah, that's the thing too.
personally
People
just
got
be
to
like,
sit with it.
hey, here's a resource, and you with your good government benefits can go get some therapy and process
But it
those.
really is. But it really is because it's the mirror. There's a way that I wish a lot of DEI folks realize you have to be the mirror. You have to have that shit bounce back off. You cannot soak it in because they already have you at a disadvantage. Many times DEI folks, it's not even a DEI problem, it's a culture problem. And they're not the same, y'all. Cultural organizational issues are not the same as a DEI issue. Many times people want to fix a cultural issue by putting a DEI hire. Let's talk about DEI hires again. Putting a DEI hire in there. You know how many? So I reviewed this department once. It was a well-known anthropology department, right? They asked me to come in because they were having DEI issues. And but it wasn't really that. So it was junior faculty not getting along with senior faculty, grad students not getting along with senior faculty, and some junior faculty, all the like, right? And there was allegations of sexism, sexual assault, racism, all kinds of shit, y'all. I mean, it was a lot going on, right? And they asked me to come in and ask them how they can manage their anti-racism plan. I said, baby, y'all ain't got an anti-racism problem. Y'all got a cultural problem. So when I went in there, though, so I did a bunch of focus groups, right? I reviewed a bunch of the past things that they had done, looked at all the current institutional policies and what they were doing, all that. Long story short, when I pulled it back out, my recommendation was if you bring because they wanted to bring literally a Black or Native hire in, faculty member in. I said, you bring a Native or Black faculty member in, they won't last a year because y'all will place all of this shit that y'all won't actually admit. You have true allegations of things that are happening with tenured faculty that you cannot do because they are tenured faculty. This is an institutional structural issue. You have graduate students who are playing with and weaponizing, quite frankly, DEI issues because they have personal vendettas and also personal issues with other students and with faculty. Y'all literally have fractions here. And all of y'all are still relying upon the name of this institution and this department to make y'all's name. So, so you are still beholden to this shit while saying that you want to break it. So do you want to break it or do you want to just make it look nicer for you?
They
Right?
wanted the second one, girl.
Because they sure didn't call me back to do the They didn't call me back, y'all, but I had to tell it because it wasn't a DEI. And I'm an anthropologist, right? So I'm looking at cultural organizational structures, very similar to what you do, right? But when you look at the structure I always say, when you look at these structures, y'all, and you look under that white tablecloth, it's some raggedy ass shit underneath there. I literally taught lessons at Brown about raggedy ass structures.
But you're right though, and the raggedy the structure, the more they're gonna get confused. Because a lot of times I get grievances sent to me because they're like, this needs to go to like the equity office, and I'm like, what happened? That was kind of messed up, but that was just a poor manager. I mean, it's not an equity issue. Like they should probably get some training, like on that. Not my DEI training, but some different training. But I think to your point, what else would have happened if they had brought on like a Black or indigenous person is that and one of the reasons that I didn't want equity or officer in my title, even though it is because in this word has created kind of this feel that the DEIA is always a gotcha type of role. Like we're there, like, are we there to find gaps in programming, find places of inequality to like create equity? Sure. But we're not there to be an actual officer and point at you and call you a racist until you stop what you're doing. And so often that is how we are viewed. Even when roles, I haven't had that title. People have looked at me and been like, well, I didn't want to get an email where I was called racist. I'm like, for me, like, that's not a job. Like, I just happen to be Black. But that's their view. And it's hard sometimes in my position where I really just want to act as a thought partner with people and help them strategize solutions. But in their head, no matter how I frame a meeting, they're thinking I'm coming down there. And I think a part of that is because of, kind of the whiteness ingrained in our organizations and institutions makes the only accountability people see as punitive. And that is not the case at all. Like, legally, I don't have authority to be punitive to a lot of these people, but also I don't want to be. What good would that do? Every time I saw something that seemed inequitable, just getting rid of that person. That's not the point. It's I help you identify the issue and then help provide solutions. And I was in a meeting today where for a whole hour, I was just there to be a thought partner. And I kept reiterating, like, I think overall the agency is doing great. I just noticed with this particular goal around recruitment and retainment, I feel like if we tweaked this one thing, that could be like a solution. They're like, whoa. Let me take you back to 1997 when this was established. And so we put this in place and this in place. And then like 20 minutes later, and they're like, and so that's why the police are involved. I'm like, oh, okay. So again, like I was saying, I think just with this little tweak to the training, it could help. I'm not here to chastise you about the operations over the last decades of state government. I work in state government because it provides me range on the type of change I want to see in society. I am not a politician. I don't plan on being a lifer in state government. I'm not even saying that like state government is even the best avenue for this work, but I'm in it. And I can see that right now in 2024, you guys are trying to make positive change and you are hindered by a statute that was created decades ago. Okay, I don't blame you. I don't even know who did it. But since we're here and it's a law, how can today we just provide some sort of solution to move forward? And I was really saying it just like that. And for some reason, the rest of the meeting was still them trying to like justify their actions. And I hate those types of spaces because they're not productive. Like they were clearly not in a space where they could hear that I'm just trying to I'm not your boss. Like I don't we're just having a meeting. Because I've had spaces where we have built that trust and they're in a place where they know that this work is hard and it's not glamorous and that there's not one solution fits all. And sometimes things are going to be messy and sometimes you're not going to be able to please everyone. And sometimes the right decision is still going to anger the most people. And that is when the real work can happen. That is when you can be vulnerable enough to be like, hey, I am down for this work and I really want to promote this. But what happens if I have built this psychologically safe environment for my team and we have open communication and I feel like we've established like a level of emotional intelligence where we're good. And then someone comes into the team and legit only believes that there are two genders and does not want to respect people's pronouns. How do I address that person by making them feel like they can be a part of the team with these views? Now that is a predicament. Now we can start to strategize because that's happening everywhere. That's the type of things we're working with. We are not delusional to think we're coming with a blank slate and everyone's going to be like, yay, DEI, and everyone's holding hands. No, we understand that we might only have one person who gets it. So how do we get the rest of the group? The one person who doesn't get it might be leadership. How do we handle that? That's the work. And I think that for people who think that there's glamour in this work, I don't think they understand the work. Like I struggled when I first got this position because everyone I saw was like, congratulations, like, do you love it? And I was like, no, like I don't. And for a while I had conflict with that. And I talked about it with my therapist and she's like, you don't have to love what happens during your job and still be passionate about the change you want to make. And that was hard, but it made sense. This job is always going to be difficult.
Yeah, when you first told me, I was like, how you doing?
Exactly.
Like, are you
Thank
okay?
you. That's the proper thing. Everyone else is like, that sounds amazing. And I'm like,
oh, child, damn. I hope they do well. And I meant that with love, y'all. I meant that with so much love. It's just like, woo.
It's difficult. I hear about like, if anyone listening can think of the most outrageous, messed up, discriminatory thing that they've heard in a place that they've worked. I hear that on a daily basis. I oversee all the agencies in the state. Like stuff isn't great. But I've also been in spaces and places where I have no power to do anything.
Yeah.
I've been in the spaces and places where the bad thing has happened to me and I don't even
Yeah.
know who I can contact or if I should, or I'm too scared. Maybe I should just quit. I don't even know how to proceed. And so, what I do appreciate about this position is that at least I can be a listening ear. I do have threads to leadership, to the deputy governors, to the governors to actually enact change. If not for the whole state, maybe just a few agencies, and I'm okay with that because I feel like it grows. I feel like once someone truly experiences a culture and a climate of a workspace that is actually equitable, actually psychologically safe, that people actually have good communicative skills, that goes with them other places. That's how I knew stuff was so janky after you left, Nicole. I was up here thinking, I'm like, wow, professional spaces are great. And then you left, and I was like, oh, dang it. That was Nicole. This stuff is janky. And so now when I go to other places, I can spot the jankiness, and I'm in a position where I can then mold it to be something similar. It's never going to be the same. I'm not that dope as you.
Oh.
But something similar where at least my team like has that, and then that can spread throughout the governor's office and then like hopefully go to the agency.
See, that's the thing, right? It's really about investing. We have to invest differently. And I think that's what I always thought about was because we did a lot of, if we think about when we were as a team, we did a lot of dreaming together. Those our staff meetings, like, and we did regular all staff meetings, right? Like in that conference room, and we dreamed. We really did put shit on the table. Everyone had a say, but there was a way in which I took responsibility for the final. Like, I'll be honest, like, and I was very clear about that. I have to, right? There is, the thing is, I had to be realistic too. I wasn't just beholden to the institution. I was beholden to three different program officers as well, because we had different funding streams. So my boss was actually, I had 4 different bosses technically who did my salary. So there was a way that there had to be responsibility taken while at the same time making space for everybody to know we have to dream, we have to figure this out and dream together, because I saw how sick we were getting individually, right? Like, so we really did, and it wasn't perfect. People did not sometimes like each other. I had more than once mediate. Y'all, I had to do, I don't know how many goddamn mediations with 2 of my staff members. Now they are literally friends. They are literally friends. But that first year, I looked at them both and then said, y'all both get on my goddamn nerves right now. Now, don't do this, y'all, but I probably should have gone. But I was like, y'all getting on my goddamn nerves. Y'all got to figure some shit out, because this is ridiculous at this point, right? Like, we had some real conversations, and people told me some hard things, because sometimes I had a habit of just bulldozing, trying to get to the work and not allowing people their process. Like, we grappled with each other and our humanity, right? And I think that was something that, because we had to build trust along the way, like you were saying earlier. And when you were saying earlier too, when you're talking about like the reactions of people and like how they like have this immediate like inability to just see the both and, that's really the whole point of equity, because you're hearing how people have bought into hierarchy, have bought into binary thinking, have bought into this idea of comfort via niceness, which is nothing more than another way of whiteness showing up in spaces, y'all. And this idea of being punitive if you do something wrong is because we live in a plantation economy that is literally built on a prison system, right? Like, Atiera literally broke down all of that. Like, that is literally, right, why we talk about equity, because that is what we are taught. And that is all filtered through identity. It's filtered through. So you, again, are not a white or black or Asian or queer. You are a being that was put upon your body, these identities that then interact with and collide with structures in different ways. But we are all literally beholden to the plantation, because if you do not own the means and modes of production, you are literally the commodity for that means and modes of production, right? And that's what you have to do, because that's what equity is. That's what diversity is. Like, diversity, we can't be human beings without diversity. That's the most fundamental genetic. People talk about genetics all the goddamn time. Well, you got a penis, you a man, you got a motherfucker. If you're not diverse, you can't live. We see in the monarchs, the European monarchs showed us, when y'all keep interbreeding.
There's no rule. Right? We've always needed.
We always needed different. It's a fundamental human thing, right? But we also, like you were saying about the emotions. This is why I love working with Atiera, because we got it. Like, we haven't been human for so long. We don't understand that we have to work the emotional state of our bodies is why people have these reactions, because you don't realize your body is signaling to you that something needs to change.
Absolutely. And I think kind of off of that, like with our identities, I think certain identities that hold lots of privileges haven't been given the opportunity to dream or have imaginations
At
about
all.
certain things.
At
Like
all.
they have kind of been in this silo. And so sometimes when we're talking about new ways of being, they don't have the capability of imagining a place where everyone has liberation. It's just not within their scope. Like it's just not there. Like they're just looking at black and white, and we're like, look at this beautiful gray area where everyone just kind of belongs and has rights and can live. And they're like, hey, like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Binary.
So when we're talking about, equity, we hear, well, at least me and you, Nicole, we hear that people have liberation. I think for some, without that imagination, they hear, oh, you want to reverse the roles of oppression.
Binary again, binary.
They can't think of outside of that. They're like, my entire life, there have been people who are oppressed and then people who have privilege. So now you're trying to mix things up. So now you want to oppress me while you have the privilege? And we're like, what are you talking about? Like none of that is the case. But they have such a huge fear, and it elicits such an emotional reaction that just the presence of an annual training can just make someone so angry that they're about to become oppressed. And I was like, wow, like even if that was our goal, which it's not, you know how long it would take to go from an annual training to flipping oppression on its head? That doesn't make
Any sense.
sense. And so that's why kind of, threaded throughout this entire conversation, we've been talking about like the emotions, getting to the crux of what people are like feeling and thinking and kind of changing that lens shift. Like that's the work. We can't even get to the work because of all of the defensiveness.
Oh my God. And so let's also, I want to bring this other piece up too. Now, this might be a little controversial, and I'm not saying that Tira's going to agree with me, but I want to bring it up too. At the same time, what I also found was not everyone should be doing DEI work, because just because you are a marginalized identity, and I mean this with love, but I mean this very directly, does not mean you actually have the training to do DEI work. Because again, the two are not the same. Right. And I think there is a both and, again, nuance. Well, both of us can sit with a hell of a lot of nuance and then be able to, think about how we move forward, or at least move a different way. And I think another piece of it is, I think some people have seen this work as chastising, has seen this work as a space in which they can let their frustrations out. And also, interestingly enough, I always said this, I don't know about you, Atiera, sometimes I've had folks, particularly white folks, I would say white women in particular, come up to me crying, thanking me for telling them that they basically weren't shit in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, Katie at Beloit, when she thought she was doing something, and I was like, don't you ever come in this office and telling us how to do this work. Well, thank you. Why are you thanking me? Like, this is weird. But I realized there is a way that, especially I see liberal white folks and liberal whiteness, has a kink fetish with being dominated, with like having this kind of weird, like, you want to be chastised, you actually like the flagellation because it makes you feel something. And I found that in my career too, and I don't consent to that. I'm not your dom. Like, I don't want to do that kind of work, right? Like, that is like, you ain't paying me enough at all for that shit now. And it's not really the work, but there is a way, because how institutions don't necessarily know what DEI is, but especially since 2020, there has been this kind of push to check a box and you put somebody in to do the work. There is an actual foundational training or understanding of this stuff too. And I think that we have to have honest conversations about folks who have made careers off identities versus understanding that we're supposed to be breaking the structures that behold us to these identities that keep us in these structures and systems. You know what I'm saying? Like,
No, I absolutely know what you're saying. I don't know which part you thought I was going to disagree with, but you're right. Not everyone should be doing this work. One, not all skin folk are kinfolk.
Child.
Like it's just, two, it does come with a certain level of skills. And I do think that, as you were saying, historically, this work has not always been done well. And I have to lead when I'm in a certain group that I know is already going to be on the defense. I have to lead with that because just in case they've been in a situation where they've been shamed or blamed, I need to let them know from the jump, like, that's not what I'm here to do. What I will also say on the other end of that is that I've been in a lot of organizations that put certain identities in places of DEIA. And I'll say this, because these are unique positions, and because we talked about before that there is kind of just this culture of mediocrity sometimes of, well, if they said I could do it, then I guess I can. I'm not going to fault some people for trying to get their coin and just taking the position and going forth. Sometimes does it cause harm? Yes. But I'm not going to get on this thing because I'm like, there's a whole bunch of mediocre people who shouldn't have their jobs
Yes.
that do. So if it is offered to you and you took it, this is no shade to you. This is just pointing out that there are certain skills that I think lend itself to being helpful in order to disarm, in order to properly educate adults, especially, and to work within systems. That's all I'm saying. Now, to your point of people kind of needing to be scolded, I haven't gotten someone thanking me for doing that. But what I have noticed is that there's a segment of people that I don't really know where it comes from, but I'm going to assume that maybe the first time they had a lens shift, it was something that had like shock value. It was something so atrociously oppressive and discriminatory that they were like, oh my gosh, this happens. And then that shifted their lens of how they saw a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think for those people, sometimes they think the only way people can lean into this work is with that shock value, because I have had people comment on certain trainings that I give. And when I give trainings, they are different depending on who I'm giving them to, how big it is, what type of organization it is. I get background on where they are kind of in their equity journey. So I know how to frame it, how to disarm, and how to work with this. There's some people that are so at the beginning of their journey, that's going to be a completely different presentation than someone who's like actually wanting the next steps of how to do this stuff. And so sometimes things don't really get that deep at first. Because again, we have to get you to understand that there's like a lens shift that needs to happen in terms of how you think about equity. And that lens shift is really hard for some people because some people legitimately have never thought about someone besides themselves ever in their life. And if they did, it was their immediate family who looked like them and act like them and sound like them. And that was a little bit easier. But anything outside of that is just very different. So we're asking people to be like, hey, I understand that you think that your experience in the world is everyone's experience, but it's not. And actually, some of these other people have really negative experiences. I know you both work at the same place. I know that they don't look all, frazzled every day like you would assume one would look if they were oppressed every day, but they are. And so I'm just going to need you to hold on to that so we can talk about ways that we can create an environment where they're not so oppressed. Some people can't, they're like, no. If that was happening, I would know. I would see it and I would know. So because I didn't see it, then it doesn't exist, which means this is invalid or you have some weird agenda, Black lady. And I'm like, okay. And now we're back at like
Well, you know
square
what
one.
that is, Atiera? That's another example of whiteness because I always listen, stay with me, y'all. I'm telling you, I'm working on this piece, been working on it for a minute. I can't get it out without like being too mean on accident. But arrogance and ignorance go hand in hand, right? And we see this, and this is a big part of whiteness, in which there is, because it has not happened to you, there is an arrogance that has you believe that only your sight matters, only your reality, therefore only time. That's why I always say time is, we don't operate in the same time. We don't operate in the same reality. We literally have different realities, different times. This is why the margins get hit first with economic hardship and stuff and natural disasters, because time is different at the margins and at the center, right? The closer to the center you are, it's just different. And so I'm saying, like, you will have the evidence, right? You will have the evidence. You will just be having a conversation. They will hear something else because it has not happened to them or they see it. There's an arrogance. And when you have you're arrogant in your perspective, that is when you show your ignorance. And that is a fundamental aspect of whiteness, because whiteness is an arrogant, ignorant, mediocre concept that consumes everything. It's an ideology, right? And so when you have bought into it, and the mediocrity comes through, that's really privilege, y'all. So if whiteness is privilege and whiteness is also all those things, and privilege, the more you align with privilege in terms of the status quo, the more you have to perform that. So why would you want to be, again, don't be mad at us for telling you this shit. Be mad at the motherfucker that told you you were white. I mean, let's be real. And be mad at your great, great, great granddaddy who said, well, fuck it. I might as well hop on over because you got lied to. So you better be mad at them goddamn forefathers. I mean, seriously, y'all.
It's misdirected anger.
Cuss your ancestors out. Cuss y'all's ancestors out for aligning with this shit because it didn't work. And I think that's something else that we had that's really hard for all of us to really admit. But this is why I'm like, believing your reality and learning from history allows us to be like, if the shit didn't work, why do we keep doing it? So that's why I couldn't stand when people would do these goddamn anti-racist committees or all these committees. Y'all stop doing committees, because you know what you're going to do? You're going to have the same goddamn recommendations the committee before that had, the committee before that had. They all recommended doing another committee because you didn't do the committee recommendations last time. Just do the fucking recommendations.
But they think that's the work.
They think that's the work.
I've been in so many places where they're like, why don't you start off with a climate survey? Now, here's the thing. I understand survey fatigue. I used to work at a survey center. And so, you know, I was like, oh, I know, I feel bad. Let me take your survey. But even I'm fatigued. So when I go into a new place, I'm like, do you have any other employment satisfaction surveys? Or is there any other data points that I can just pull the information? And they usually do. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging, but I can usually get a pretty good glance at what's going on here. And so they're like, but we still want to do the climate survey. Why? We understand what the issue is. Was there additional oppressive activities that you wanted to ask people about? Because I have a list here. We have like a dozen things. Let's start with those. And then if you want to go past that dozen, we can do a climate survey to get some more. But they think that's the work. At my last position, when I came on, they already had a DEIA committee. I was like, great. I don't have to establish it. It had people from all the different departments. I was like, this is wonderful. And when I got there, I quickly realized that their work over the past year was creating the job description for the job I just got hired for. So they were like, we worked for a year and then we got you. And I was like, okay, wonderful. So then I was like, so moving forward, we should have a discussion about what you want this committee to look like, because I'm here. You did that. Check. Okay. So now what do we want to focus on? I'm like, we can focus on particular populations. We can focus internally on trainings. We can focus externally, maybe on better relationships with the indigenous population. Like, you keep being like, we want to name this park and we want to invite them. And I'm like, that's strange. We don't have a relationship with them. Are you giving them the land? Because that's dope. And they're like, no. We bought it and we just want to be like, hey, do you want to help us name it? I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. But we could focus on building a relationship with them with this committee. What do you do? And they were like, what about a Black history And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, sure, that's February. Okay, great. What else? Like in terms of like framework, overarching goals, what's our charge? What? And so then I brought in just examples of charges. There was like 5 different ones on 5 different things we can do. And they're like, they really liked that party idea. And that is where I think like these were the most equitable people in the place who all got together to do this work. And they did a decent thing. They were like, we can't do it alone. So they brought in an expert, but the work isn't glamorous anymore. It's real glamorous to bring in the first equity manager. It's like that, what's it called? Pet to threat type of thing. Like they were really excited that I was there. But I'm like, but now we have to do actual work. Like we have to do things, and it might be uncomfortable, but we have to do them. And I think that's a hard part in most, because they don't respect the work, they don't see the work, and therefore they don't respect us. And trust me, it's much easier to be performative.
It really is. No, it really is.
It's
It really
very
is. And that's what a lot of people are like. And that was something the last training I did for a government agent, like a government agency. They called it a core team of like different people from around different agencies to do equity work as well. And when I did their training, it was a lot about the human, like themselves, their emotions and the responses and how they feel and stuff. And it was funny because one woman said that there was 4 sessions, and she said after the first session, she hated me and hated it and wasn't sure. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. She's like, but by now, I was like, I wish I had more. Like, I wish I can come back. And I was like, well, I'm not coming back no more here. Shit, like y'all were hostile, right? I could feel that hostility, but I knew I had to have you see your hostility and then work through it, right? And there's a way that, I'll be honest, that's exhausting. It's even knowing it's exhausting, right? Like, so there's a way that I also really adamant with DEI practitioners. You have to understand that these positions have an inherent lifespan. There is a burnout rate. You are not going to get around that. I'm sorry. And if you stay, then there is going to be an impact on your body. There will, I've seen, it's just I've seen folks die from this shit, literally from the stress afterwards, right? I've seen folks break down physically from it, mentally from it, and I think that is the reality when you are trying to invoke change in spaces that don't want it, right? So this is why I say believe your reality and then strategize that way, because you cannot fix a space that doesn't want to be fixed, but you can't break that motherfucker some more because it's already broken. And I think that's a different way to look at some shit, right? So if you want to break me, bitch, I will break my soul. I'll break your shit, right? And I think but I think that's where the dreaming comes in, because then what would it look like to actually center you in the work? Not the institution, not anybody else. What do you need, right, to do the work? And I think that is something that when I work with folks a lot, like, and even talking with y'all, like, it would be like, okay, so what does it mean for what would be fun for us? What do we actually want to do? And that's what kind of I get woke series. So we were in a meeting one day, and I was irritated, as I usually was, about some shit some faculty members said to me, and basically saying that we weren't doing enough work, even though we're doing all the work of the school. And I said, you know what, motherfuckers just need to understand that they don't even know how to bring liberal arts into practice. And Atiera says, well, people need to get woke. And I said, what if we just had a get woke series?
And we did it.
And we did it.
Right.
And we did it. But we did it our way. We
Yeah.
did it our way. I was told to my face, you cannot, because we were always overprogrammed. The school, every institution, every higher ed institution you go to, y'all's overprogrammed. There is 18 million things happening in one fucking night. And Beloit was like this big, right? Like, and always had stuff going on, except for Fridays at 7 p.m. And I said, okay, well, fuck it. Friday 7 p.m. seems to be an open spot. We'll do it then. We'll do our programming then. And I was told to my face by every administrator, it would never work. You can't get people in the seats. No one's going to come, right? And then also this big one. And then how do you get the people who don't want to be there? Y'all, I said to old boy who's now the dean of students now, I told him and old Scotty B, I said, I don't give a shit about the people who don't want to be there. I want the people who want to be there. I want a space for them. Can we stop focusing on the folks who don't want to be there? This during Trump's election too, y'all. Trump had just got elected. So there was all this, y'all don't understand in higher ed. When Trump got elected, there was more focus on conservative students and their feelings than the actual students who were being targeted. And I mean that on many college campuses. And it was infuriating to sit in fucking meetings. And we had an anti-Semitic hate crime on campus. We had the goddamn campus plastered with genetics materials about how race is real and we need to go to it. On our office, I had my own goddamn picture and a fucking noose with the rest of us who were organizing at the time, right? And I was sitting in meetings listening to administrators, provost, the dean of students, the fucking Bill, the goddamn chaplain of the school talk about how conservative students were fearing for them safety right now because Trump was elected.
It was infuriating. I was a part of a committee that had been talking for months about creating space for students of color. And they're like, I don't know what they mean by space. I've heard that some young men go to the recording studio downtown. Is that a space? And I'm like, I mean, it technically is a space, but they want space on this campus, just like we have spaces for all types of different things. And for months, it was like, I feel like every day I was like, how could I reword this to help them understand space? But when they understood it was when those racist zines that you were talking about eugenics went out. When that happened, we had a committee meeting that day, and someone was like, I feel like they're doing this because they don't have other outlets. What we should do is create a space for them.
Yep.
To get this out. Maybe some sort of debate, and we do all these things. And I'm like, oh, so now you understand space. Now you understand.
I remember being in meetings with that. I remember somebody literally to my face said that we should have a dialogue about those books. I looked at that woman and y'all, there is a background. My whole goddamn training is in disproving the utilization of skeletal analysis as saying race is real. I am trained by some of the top anthropologists who were the first to disprove race as biologically real in the goddamn skull. Norm Sauer was on my fucking dissertation committee. When I say I have been trained to push back against eugenics literature because my own research was used for eugenicists, I had my master's thesis looking at non-secular race of the skull in American blacks and whites to disprove the understanding of race being biologically real being used on white supremacist goddamn websites to show race was real. Right? So Norm taught me well. Norm said that these people will fucking twist your words because Norm would go to the state capitol in Michigan and push back because, especially in the 2010s, the 2010s, there were a lot of the evangelicals were trying to get passed in the Michigan legislature creative design as a way to teach creationism. So it was a way to get around, there was a big resurgence of creationism trying to get put back into public schools because that was when the time that goddamn the Genome Project came out, but also the social Darwinism, with the, in 96 wrote that damn book. What's that? I forgot, y'all, but there was a resurgence of IQ shit coming back out. So we had eugenicist literature really making a resurgence. So that's the backdrop. These fucking these flyers come out on campus and the same thing, we should debate. I looked at that girl and said, are you fucking kidding me? You do not give space for eugenicist type of rhetoric in the actual public. You choke this shit out. And she was queer.
Jesus.
A white gay woman. I'm sitting here there's a way that it's okay to debate humanity when you refuse to sit in your own. It's okay to debate somebody else's humanity when you don't see them as human. People tell on themselves without telling on themselves with the reactions to this work. And I think that's what we also know too. We hear what you are saying, even though you don't realize what you are saying to us. And I got to fix my motherfucking face because you are literally telling me you don't see me as a real human. And I'm supposed to sit here and look at you and not punch you in the face. Right?
And we don't even get credit for how nonviolent we are.
How not proud. The shit that people have said to us, to our faces.
It's like I feel like what's interesting is I don't know if you were still at the college when this happened. Someone wrote a piece, not at the college, but a Black faculty member after retirement wrote a piece about his experience in academia. Were you around when this happened? And someone from the college wrote a response. And the response was basically being like, I don't know why you're putting out all these lies, but if what you say happened, like basically you wouldn't be able to like get up and leave the house in the morning. So the fact that you're saying you experienced these things for decades in this system, but you continued to basically like thrive and you still had a career, like I don't know why you're spouting these lies. And so he posted this on like a public forum in which prospective students could see it, current students could see it, everyone could see it. And so some people from our office responded like, hey, this is actually pretty problematic. You invalidating this stranger's experience and saying that the narratives of people who experience this can't be true, because if they were true, if you had experienced those things, you wouldn't be able to leave the house.
You wouldn't be able to leave the fucking house. You're telling of yourself.
There was a lot of back and forth because randomly, like some professors came, to this person's aid, and there was like back and forth, and then eventually everyone got their like email privileges revoked for non-work things.
Y'all, this happens all the time. Institutions, they will use that reply all. Child, the tea you will read on some of these higher ed streets.
But I think that's very telling. Like, one, I don't think people understand how odd it is that a species doesn't see other parts of their species the same. Like, that's odd. Even different breeds of dogs know that that's a dog. Like a German Shepherd's like, I don't know what that little thing is. They know it's a Chihuahua, which is a dog. Like, they know it's a dog. Only humans go through all of this weird cognitive dissonance to do all of this work to make nonsense make sense. Because who reads another stranger's experience and has a level of entitlement to say, no, that can't be true? Part of it because they haven't seen it, so it can't be true. Part of it because they have so little respect for that other person's identity that they don't think it's true. And a part of it is because of their own mediocrity, that they know that themselves would not be able to endure the oppression that so many people endure on a daily basis and still function. And so versus them just looking at it and being like, wow, I just learned something new about our society. While I'm not treated like this, I guess it turns out that colleagues who look differently than I have a harder experience. Like, even if you don't want to do anything about it, it takes nothing just to acknowledge this person's humanity and their experience. But no, they'd rather bend over backwards and come to the conclusion that someone retired and was like, what do I want to do with my time? I want to come up with a bunch of lies about things that I experienced over the decades of my career and just like publish it. That makes no sense. Like, either something's missing up there, or people are legitimately just exhausting themselves with all these mental gymnastics to make this stuff make sense.
Because honestly, again, if you can't see your own humanity, how the hell are you going to see it in somebody else's? right? You can't. It's not even about love. It's about you really don't even see what you deserve. So how the hell? So you can't see it in somebody else who you can't even imagine could endure something because they have to, right? And this is what I always tell Black folks. I mean, I think it's all. That's why you got to dance. This is where you got to dance, where you got to find some joy. Because honestly, because it will suck you dry. That's the function of these spaces. It's made to suck you. It wants more and more and more. And the more you give it and the better you are at it, like you said very early in this conversation, is when the backlash happens. So when you are in DEI, you have to expect backlash. Do not go in naive. And I have to tell my clients that all the time. I love you, but you go in naivete is helpful to go in many times because you wouldn't go in many times if you know what the fuck is going to happen. But at the same time, once that naivete has served its purpose, don't continue with it. Right? Like, so this is why you got to figure out then what do you want? What do you need? And then how do you bring that into the space by centering you? Right. And then if you center you, that's centering the margin, y'all. If you are the margins, then center you. But who is the you are centering? Don't center the Black woman that you are told is a service. Center you, who is identified as a Black woman, and what the hell do you need for your humanity?
Absolutely. And also, I think acknowledging, even though it can be hard because it's not often that, amazingness gets like shade, but some of it is jealousy. Like, I see this,
It is.
I think it's more clear kind of with queerness that I think some of like the homophobia is anger that you can't express yourself the way you want to. Not to say that everyone's queer, but just there is something that has been policed about how you act, how you are, how you carry yourself, your expression. And you are so upset that you've been told no for so long. And here's this person living their best life, doing the thing that you were told was unacceptable. That angers people. And then they misdirect that to the other person. And I think with like brown and Black people, they want, like, I feel like there's a lot of contradictions. They want so hard to be like, but we're all equal. Okay, great. That's why we shouldn't have DEI. Oh, okay. But then they're like, but we don't want a DEI hire because they're innately less qualified. Well, I'm confused. Are we equal? Or are we less qualified? I don't understand, because it seems to me that the only way you can come to that conclusion is twofold. One, you truly believe that brown and Black people are less than, or you know that we're equal and you know that things have been done inequitably forever,
Yeah.
and you are so scared of what that means for your mediocrity when things really are level, because you're kind of like, I feel like the only reason I got here is because some of those privileges, and I don't want to necessarily oppress, but I don't want you to come for my things.
Yes. No, very much so. And this is why I tell folks all the time, please believe what you are experiencing. You have to, especially when everyone looks the same. Because this is where the queerness come in. I have had to work with folks who are all Black, but the way in which the Black queer body was done, you would have thought that it was a bunch of white folks in that space, because whiteness operated in that space. Right. Again, there was no ability for folks to be fully in it. Everyone was Black, but everyone was also beholden to the structure and systems of the institution. Right. So again, this is, again, believe your experiences, y'all. And how do you believe that? By getting in your goddamn body. How do you get in your body? Might as well dance.
Full circle.
Full circle. Might as well dance. All right. So we've been on here for a minute, and honestly, Atiera and I could talk for forever. Honestly, I might have you back on and to talk about higher ed in general again, because it's always good to reminisce when we're not in it.
Yeah.
But I'm ending this season with folks talking about their dreams, and talking about how their dreams can come into reality, especially when it comes to music. So if you're thinking about this idea of liberation, because you think about equity as a liberatory practice, right? What is a song that embodies that essence for you? Whatever comes to mind first. It ain't got to be the one, but what's a
Okay.
song?
There is a song that I think there's probably ones that can embody it better, but the first one that popped in my head is a new song that I heard called "It's a Them Problem." Um, if you have not heard that
I have
song,
not heard that one.
it's a bop, and the chorus is like, "That's a them problem. That's a them problem." It was like, it's okay that they mad because you glad, and it's basically just about people come at you and for all different reasons, and especially when you're doing this type of work, even if you are just very grounded in the work and yourself, we're human beings, and there's only so many times people can try to shift your reality or tell you that you're wrong until you start believing it a little bit. And so I've had to create spaces, like weekly spaces, where I meet with like other colleagues and practitioners, just so I could be like, okay, this happened. Am I tripping? And so that song is kind of my anthem of like, I wasn't tripping. That's a them problem. And I can keep on trucking. So that's going to be mine.
Oh, I love that. That's a great way to end this, because it also reminds us that we don't live in isolation, because we are human. So we do need to connect and talk with others so that we remember that our reality is real, right? And it allows us to bring the imaginations bigger. So I want to thank Atiera, Dr. Coleman, for being on. Again, I'm ever on later on in future seasons. But be on the lookout, y'all, for in the next episode. It'll just be me and y'all rapping, talking about what's been going on, especially post-election, all right, and how we have to kind of really strategically dream right now at this time, because we are being presented with the imagination of the state, and it's doubling down in its empire. So we'll talk about that next time, okay? But as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscapes that we can actually make the futures we want reality today. Until next time.